please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeff Strohl, Research Professor and Director at Georgetown University Center on Education and Workforce, or the CEW, a founding member of the CEW and Director of Research since 2008. Dr. Strohl leads work that bridges education and labor market data to inform policy. His research also examines biases in post-secondary and labor market outcomes. Prior to CEW, he conducted national program evaluations at WestStat, focusing on socioeconomic diversity in American education, and sought to affect post-secondary admission policies. Dr. Strohl will be presenting Shifting Demographics, Strategic Pathways, Securing the Midwest Workforce. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Strohl.
And I always like to say, for exercise, I jump to conclusions and run regression. So, anyways, thank you very much for having me. This hopefully will be a lot of fun for me. I'm not sure about all of you. I previewed your agenda, and it is dry as nails. You guys have great courage to have sat here for 2 days doing business items as they read on that agenda. So hopefully, while you're eating, I can help liven things up. I think following Jason is great. I'd almost could riff off of everything that he was talking about in our work, but I won't. A couple of items, though, that I do want to bring up. One, to the gentleman who raised about people going to the highest cost institutions. There is a lot of work that's been done that show that students want to go where the amenities are, and some of the cost drivers are amenities. So we have this split between what we're doing with education, which is delivering well-being, delivering a lifestyle, the band, the best basketball team. And so as we think forward about costs, as members who make these decisions at the state level, well, how much do you want to invest in the band and the football team versus education when the students and the population want those items? And so that's where we can start to get into non-pecuniary benefits of a lifestyle that going to college brings. There's also evidence that parents want to choose institutions based on the average test score versus the value add, meaning how much gain. So it sort of sometimes sits as a positional good, but we also know that helps leverage networks. So we have to weave our way through a bunch of very complicated factors when we start to think about college. The other point I wanted to raise, and Jason set my soapbox up, I've been working on these issues of developing out enhanced wage records for about 15 years now, which leads into the PSEO. So if you think about what Jason was presenting on the PSEO and thinking about your state's SLDS system, they're industry-based. It goes back to the 1930s. We're educators here in the room. Education, industry is where you work, occupation is what you do. And so there's a movement abreast, and it's been at least since 2010, if not earlier, to get occupation onto the wage record so we can better track what people are doing so that we have a better understanding of the use of our education and training investments, right? How people place, et cetera. So as we work forward, and you're in your state, think about this and help present the argument about what would make a good business argument for making these investments so that we can better gain value from post-secondary and help the state and the students achieve economic growth, economic mobility, economic stability as we move forward. So I think it's very, very important. So there's a lot of work. Strata Institute is doing a lot of work in this area on enhanced wage records. So you'll be hearing more about it. So hopefully, come across your plate. So anyways, a little bit about me, and then I'll get into my presentation. I've done an awful lot of work at the state level over the last almost 20 years. I started doing work with states with Lumina Foundation on setting attainment goals. This is how I met Susan. And I also did a lot of work with states on developing state longitudinal data systems, in particular very focused on how to make them useful. And so too often I've seen in the data world, you've got a bunch of data junkies who want more data, but don't really make an argument about why it's valuable. So our approach to this has been hat in hand. What kind of questions are you and people in your states asking that data systems development can help you address? So these are the kind of things, and so these types of meetings for me are extremely valuable because they give me an ear to the ground to hear what kind of questions you all have, what's resonating. So as we go through my presentation, it will be valuable to you, hopefully, and to me, definitely, if you ask questions, probing. Don't let lunch get in the way, I guess, because we have a whole suite of work that we've done. We focus on the alignment between education and labor market. How do you create feedback loops between these items? How do we understand the value of our investment? How do we increase the value of our investment? And how does it help the people in our country and our states uplift to achieve economic mobility? How do we reinforce the idea that education is, in fact, a great equalizer? And so by asking pressing questions, it'll help me bring in a body of research rather than what I show you on 8 or 10 slides. So anyways, on that note. So looking at shifting demographics and its impact on post-secondary education, and in particular workforce issues, that's what I'll focus on here. See if I get this right here. There we go. So thinking about this, post-secondary education is like a nut is stuck between a three-sided anvil at the moment. We're having declining enrollment, we're having other demographic issues going back to the baby boom, and we're having a growing distrust in college. While this is all happening, we've been having a whole function of upskilling across the economy where we need more college-educated workers. And when I say college, I'm not biased to four-year. Often people, when they say college, they think you only mean four-year. I mean education and training beyond high school. Most of the demand and the unmet demand is, in fact, BA and above, which represents a package of both hard and soft skills, which I'll talk about later. But just to be clear, I'm talking about stuff past high school, and our economy needs it. So as we're going through this distrust of post-secondary, we're like shooting ourselves in the damn foot, and it's something that we need to puzzle through. So I'll try to talk a little bit about this. And so we are going to be facing major skill shortages by 2032 in the United States as a combination of these factors, which is the growing distrust, the declining high school cohorts, and this growth in the demand for post-secondary education, tied back to what we call skill-biased technological change. So as we see this going on today, there's a growing dialogue about the importance of middle skills and skilled trades. I used to build houses. I can plumb your economy as well as your house. And so they're very valuable parts, but over-relying on growth of the middle skills is not the best idea, because most of the skilled trades grow with population. You only need so many electricians to build so many houses and to plumb so many items. So they're very tied with population growth. So they're good jobs, they're things that we need to invest in, but we also have to realize that as the economy becomes more complicated and we have the introduction of technology, it really drives the need for more advanced skill sets. So as we move forward, we really need to think about, especially with this decline in population, of how we better use technology. How do we marry technology with education so we can enhance technology? So if you look across countries, there's a great economist issue recently looking at the gray tsunami, as they call it, and this really gets back to larger demographic effects than the declining high school cohort. And we see in Japan, where they've had huge declines in, or huge increases in the age portion of the population and declining fertility, they've been able to maintain growth by marrying and embracing technology. In the United States, we've not been able to do this to the same degree. And so it's something for us to think forward on. And so we need investments and we need policy planning. And one of my new favorite quotes is, failing to plan is planning to fail. So if we can identify what's in front of us, we need to start to think about how do we overcome it with the thoughtful planning at the state and at the national level. And it's going to require investments. And this is going to be really difficult. Back to my statement about the investments you all make in your state institutions. Do you want to continue to make investments that the population wants, i.e. the basketball team? right? I think we do. I'm a great believer in the value of what we call non-pecuniary benefits, well-being, civic aspects, supportive democracy, et cetera. But you all hold, at the end of the day, influence or hold the purse strings, and so these decisions are ones that are made at the state level. So anyways, just I'll briefly reference this. It's the same as Jason showed, except it's stolen directly from Witchy's report showing the percentage decline in high school cohorts, and you can see that the Midwest, as well as other mostly the top part of the country, are having huge declines in the size of the high school cohorts over time. And so this is part of that feedstock part of the problem. So now as we think about what's coming in front of us, this is work that we've done on what we call good jobs. And so we look at good jobs using an economic threshold of how close does it get you to entering the middle class. When we started this work in 2016, the threshold was around $35,000. It happens to be around the 30th percentile of the earnings distribution, so it's sort of the middle. That's growing. We've inflation adjusted. It's around 43,000 now. And you can see the top part here, and of course the numbers are too small to read, but that's always a problem with PowerPoints, that today, or 2021, about 59% of good jobs went to people with a BA and above. It's predicted to grow to 66. My point about the middle is currently it's around 22%. It's predicted to decline to 19%. But I do want to point out that that decline isn't a numeric decline. It's a percentage decline. So as the workforce and the population grows, that percentage is declining, but it's actually about the same number of workers. And then if you look at in each of these sectors, the degree to which the education pathway leads to a good job, you see that the BA's 78 grows to 79, middle's 52 to 52, high school goes from 38 to 36 percent of the people in those jobs who obtain a good job. And so this is just a picture of how education enhances people's access to economic opportunity and to some degree mobility, though none of this is longitudinal, so I don't actually show what's happening with wage growth, which actually is another important part of the problem or analysis we should be doing, is particular when you get into accountability systems, is what's the potential growth. But we'll save that for another discussion. So anyways, some of the work that we've been trying to do to start thinking about how we address some of these issues, i.e. getting people access to economic opportunity, is through the lens of alignment. So how well aligned is the delivery of education in a state or in a system to projected labor market demand? This work that we've done in a report called The Great Misalignment is only focused on community colleges. We would like to eventually extend this work to 4 years, but in this work, we see that about 50% of programs in community colleges would need to be redistributed to meet projected labor market demand. So something's off a little bit. Now, some of this is in the fact that we've never built mechanisms that make community colleges and other institutions highly sensitive to projected labor market demand. Some early work has been done in California, building a tool called the Launch Board, where they actually use short-term employment projections to help with enrollment management. So this work that we've done, and again, it's a gross approximation. I would not tell somebody to change their program based on our data, but it's the idea to start thinking about this. You know, so how do we get to alignment pieces? And we fall short. Now, we don't know what a natural rate of alignment would be. This is a part of a problem. So the way the U.S. labor market works, and in our approach to free markets is to allow the market to drive things. So there's always going to be frictional outcomes, right? There's going to be things that on the surface look to be inefficient, but in the long run, it's a sort of a, shall I say, a natural equilibrium or a dynamic equilibrium. I think 50% is pretty darn low, and it does represent an awful lot of ill-used resources if we're trying to use education as a workforce development device. We don't always do that, but if we're trying to do that, getting these alignment levels up is really going to be important as we move forward. And we have a second report that takes a look at this. Oh, and this work is done on what we call labor market shed areas. So we're not looking at individual institutions here. We're looking at how networks of community colleges serve what are called labor market shed areas. So we get all the institutions in areas where people drive to work, commuter shed, and look at how they deliver as a unit, right? And so as you know, it's not very likely that community colleges and other institutions are really highly coordinated, and there's a degree to which we don't want it. Right? We're not a centrally planned economy. Colorado has tried this of assigning out, you do X and you do Y, and it doesn't move very quickly. So this goes back to what is the natural rate of alignment that we could expect given all the other functions of our labor market. So anyways, we've not kept up with post-secondary demand since it started accelerating in about 1983 with the beginning what we call skill-biased technological change. And now with these declining high school cohorts, we're going to be facing major skill shortages by 2032, about 700,000 shy in the middle skills, which is certificates and associate's degrees, and about 4.6 million shy in the BA and above. So we're talking, bigger than a bread box here. So growing distrust in college is just not helping anything. It's forcing us to look in the mirror, which I think I'm going to point out is extremely important. But the degree of distrust that we're now facing in post-secondary is making the problem to say, go invest in more college, is a hard argument to make in some circles, so it's something we need to work through. And so what I'm asking myself is, why is there this distrust? And then what can we do about it? Sorry. Okay. So in about 1980, 83, we saw this huge increase in earnings for post-secondary employment. The line here, the pinkish line, is actually all workers. If I was to put the college wage premium here, you would see that it accelerated from about 40%, which was a century-long equilibrium, shall we say, and it grew to above 80%. In the same period of time, though, we saw costs begin to increase substantially over the period of time. And so in 1983 and 1986, you could just say, what are you going to earn? Right? It wasn't an ROI discussion at that point. It was when costs began to really accelerate and people became very conscientious that, Jesus, Jiminy Christmas, this cost me a lot of money, that we really get into the ROI discussion. So this began to create the conditions of mistrust because it wasn't just a guarantee. So as we look forward, I'll explain this in a second, but I think that post-secondary education is very guilty of saying college is a guarantee. Okay, we need to get over this. We need to talk to people in some type of terms that it's a probability statement. Of course, we don't want to say that. That will fall flat on its flat, but college raises the likelihood that you will enter the middle class. It doesn't guarantee it. I love a quote of Ben Franklin, and he said that the Constitution promises us the right to pursue happiness, but it doesn't guarantee you'll catch it. The same with education on catching the middle class earnings. So here in these, the middle orange bar is the 75th percentile of high school earnings, and then 2 over at about 30 is the median high school, and up around 70 is the median BA. So the problem with saying it's a guarantee is all those blue bars under 60,000, under 40,000 means you're not even doing as well as a high school degree. And if you look at some of the work controlling for return on investment, about 25% of BAs don't return a positive ROI. So we've got to figure out how to message this so that we're being honest. We need to own this problem so that when we talk to people, we're telling them that, yes, if you're going to cross this bridge versus that bridge, you're better off to take this one because 79% of the jobs give you a good job compared to high school, which is well under 50. But on the other hand, it's not 100%. And I think it's a message that we need to refine. I don't have the answer of how we do it, but it's something that we need to address so that we regain trust, right? Being as honest as possible and looking in the mirror. So now, as all of this has been going on, we see the growth of skills-based hiring, and now sometimes called skills-forward hiring. And there's a subtle difference between the two, where the early part of the movement was skill-based hiring, which is really about using labor market experience as a substitute for degree, where skills-forward hiring, I believe, is about, even for an entry-level worker, to look at the skills, try to disaggregate what someone has to use it as a marker of are they work-ready and a gamble for an employer worth taking. Some of the reason why skills-based hiring has gained traction is the growing complexity in the labor market. We see in the labor market today that the number of occupations has grown by about 3 times. The number of post-secondary programs has grown by 5 times. According to the Credential Engine, there's 1 million combinations of degrees in institutions. I actually don't like the number because it's a mathematical permutation, but it doesn't take account that different institutions could be providing the same program, but we'll stick with it for now. And we've got all this data and all this complexity, but students don't use it. Right? We're not able to deliver it, haven't figured out the delivery mechanisms, which I think is extremely important. If I could do any one thing, it would be to work on financial literacy. As Jason mentioned, we both have finished first-year students. My son, with all the work I do in this area, what did he use to decide on his college? What his friends did. What did he decide on his major? What his parents do. My wife's also an economist. I mean, and so all the information from, I tried to push them, they don't use it. So what do? How do we move the needle and get them to at least respond? And there's some work in this area, but I think it's a difficult problem. And when we provide data on ROI, what do? What do you do? What did my roommate make? What's my, it's not, we reduce what we do with the information to a comparison in a limited field. We actually don't use it in a way, and we're guilty, my center is guilty of this, as well as how people use information, right? We use it headlining or billboards. So one of the promises that skill-based hiring has made is that it's going to fight credentialism. I think that's a bunch of malarkey. Because if we start to decompose work into skills, we're going to go from 6 or 8 degree levels and 140 programs to 5,000 skills. I'm sorry, that doesn't reduce credentialism. I just want to knock that one off the table. But it does promise to help us differentiate markets in a way that will help improve hiring and hopefully opportunity. So in the US labor market, we have about 11 job changes across the career, and most of them are in the early first 10 years of the career. So there's a lot of churn. So we job match by churn. And some of this, I stole this picture from somebody. So in around 1973, when there was very little post-secondary attainment in the United States compared to all the other levels, the employer could basically reach into this pool and have a very high likelihood of a good hire, in particular because they invested on training. So they got somebody who had a requisite level of cognitive skills and developed thinking and could read and report, and put a lot of training dollars into them. So then, as time moved forward, we had this gigantic increase in post-secondary education, and the market became less differentiated. It was less easy to reach into that pool and pull out a good hire. And at the same time, around 1992, the employers began to pull back on training dollars. So you had to be work-ready, and you had a big pool of people to pull from, so the likelihood of a good hire began to go down. So as we move into skills as part of the package, we're actually creating a whole bunch of differentiated labor markets again. So now I can reach in and say, accounting skills, economist skills, and it begins to raise the likelihood at the point of hire to have someone who could work out. Now, as you all know, the interview process is horrendous for actually predicting good hires. That's why we have probationary periods, right? But at least you know somebody will come in with the right starting package that you can work with, when before, with the huge growth of post-secondary, it was less likely. So one of the things that I really like about skills-based hiring is that it forces us to think about occupations as bundles of skills. Right? This is how we end up defining these things. If you follow the coding, they ask you, what do you do? What are your tasks and activities? And somebody who's done this a lot sits and codes them into an occupation. And as you see occupational evolution, it's because somebody at your firm begins to accumulate a certain set of skills, and then you call them whatever you call them, and it turns into a new occupation. So it's really a good intuitive way to think about what an occupation is. So thinking about it from the skill side, we're talking about building portfolios that align with the needs in the labor market. So we're starting to atomize things, but in a way that I think is productive, right? We're just no longer just letting sometimes letting faculty make the decision. We're trying to start to think about what is it coming from the labor market that is going to help us identify the correct portfolio of skills that is going to help somebody move through the labor market. And so it becomes very important. Now, post-secondary education, we really need to embrace this skills concept as we think about educational delivery. We need to think about those signals from the labor market so we can better refine our curriculum development to meet these. I don't think we can always do it because accreditation, et cetera, the response time of traditional post-secondary is a little slower sometimes than the labor market. So there is a lot of room for some new models to be brought into this. But the other point that we really need to hold on to is recognizing that skills are not enough. The secret sauce to U.S. economic vitality is actually a combination of general and specific skills. And what it does with general education is it enables you to be flexible in the labor market. The research shows this in immigration moving inside the country. It shows it in making a decision to make an investment in yourself on long-term time horizons, the ability to absorb new technology. So it enables the economy to move because the individual worker can move. Now, the best read on the difference between general and specific skills actually comes out of some literature from the CTE community, which surprised me. And they said that general education is the ability to recognize the underlying rule structure of a task and transport it to a new task. So you're not just learning widget A, but from learning widget A, you can transport that knowledge that you learn on the job to doing widget B without as necessarily having a new training and education intervention between the two. And so this is one of the things that really enhances U.S. economic flexibility. Some great work done by Alan Kruger and a guy named Coomer, I don't know his first name, shows that over-investing in specific education slows down this absorption of new technologies. And so we need to remember this when we hear this wave of middle skills, vocational, trade schools. They're great, but they're not the full package. They're not what makes us work. They make other economies work. And so when I hear about somebody who's gone to Switzerland or Germany and coming back with the newest apprenticeship model, they miss how things work in the United States. We need to learn from other economies. So in the US, going between states, we have some great examples of advanced CTE methodologies and bringing practitioners into the classroom and cutting edge knowledge. It's great, but we have a different way of doing things, and we need to remember it, because the fear of over-investing in specific education, of undermining the college education as we deliver it, is going to be actually less flexibility in our economy. And I don't think we have the supporting mechanisms to deal with this that Europe does. And they end up having much stronger social safety net. They're willing to take much, much higher levels of unemployment and support it. There's things that we're not willing to do. So we need to remember how important this is to the American model. So anyways, just to close, You know, I think that education can continue to be an engine of growth. We need lots of employer engagement. I don't think that the U.S. education system should become an assembly line for capitalism, but the people who are going to your institutions, ask them what they want. They want a job. To get a job, they have to demonstrate being work ready. Right? So there has to be part of the educational process that we're investing in that meets employer needs so that we have a trust. Someone else was using the trust element, right? The employer has to trust that your institution is delivering somebody who is either work ready, which I don't think is a good criterion. It creates sort of labor as a spot market, but at least can grow towards you reduce time to productivity. We need this educational alignment, and this kind of goes back with the employer engagement. We just need to be thinking about it. I don't say we need to have it dominate, but we at least need to think about it. We need this career navigation. How the hell do we help students through all this data, all this complexity, to help think forward? And a lot of us here are data junkies. Let's do a better job than making decimal points. Let's figure out how to help the students with the informational literacy that we wish they were doing. I think we need to embrace skills in AI. We need to make AI a tool. I think we need to stop being afraid of AI. We need to recognize it as a tool and then figure out how to make best use of it. We're going through some structural change here. We've done it before. We've been faced time and time again with the newest boogeyman, and guess what? We make it through it. There is an American model of success that hits challenges and gets through them. And I hope that we make it again. And as Jason and I said, as we have students who are starting, I pray that he gets it figured out, because it's their generation that's going to have to resolve what the hell to do, because I'm not going to do it. I don't do AI, but I'm going to tell my son to do it. And then as we think about this declining high school cohorts, we do have one point of solution for the skill shortage, the labor shortage part of the skill shortage, which is increasing labor market participation, labor force participation. If you look from 2000 to today, labor force participation has gone from around 67 or 68% to around 61 or 62%. So we have a huge number of people many able-bodied, but some disabled, and we have a lot of drug issues, et cetera, but there's still a number of people who have left the labor market who can bring them back in. If we start to do strategies like that, we have to recognize that the majority of the people out of the labor market either have redundant skills or have lower levels of skills. That means we have to make major investments in post-secondary education and training to get them up to speed. So it's just not so easy as to force people back to work to resolve the problems that are facing us in the future. We need investments. In the United States, we now invest a quarter of the money that we did in 1980 in training, and this is not adjusting for changes in the size of the labor market. So we have given up investing on training, at least through the public sector in the United States. So on that, I'm going to open it for questions, and I have one other thing if everybody gets quiet, but I suspect this group won't, so. All right. No, don't be shy, folks, come on.
In one of your slides, you'd mentioned that students don't take advantage of some of the services like career services. What are some suggestions?
Could you repeat your question? Sorry, you missed the first part.
One of your slides, you talked about how students aren't utilizing services, high school counselors, or career services when they're ready to graduate. What are some suggestions on improving that?
This one goes back to the founder of our center, who's now retired. He suggested that we make career counseling a tenured position in universities, and to make it so that it's mandatory, because we might be suffering what I call the free lunch problem. If you look at free lunch pickup between middle school and high school, it declines significantly because people don't want to be seen in the free lunch line. The same phenomenon could exist in the career counseling and career navigation line, right? Oh, gee, you need that, you are deficient. So if you were to make it mandatory, you would then have at least more individual focus, and even across the board. Now, each person might need a different level, so that would be one suggestion. Secondly, I think we need to do a lot more work on understanding what the salient points of information are. people like myself and others in the field are very guilty of being academics and say, gee, you should look at this information and it will make everything wonderful, rather than asking what pieces of information are salient and how to reduce the number of elements. If we take, past 5 data points, I blur. Imagine if you're 17, what are you going to do with 25 different points of information? So how do we need to work on that kind of summarization so that the information is very pointed. And I mean, the counselors that I've talked to, they don't evaluate. They don't have the resources to evaluate differences. And of course, there's standout programs that have been evaluated, CUNY, ASAP, et cetera. But for the counseling organization, they're kind of islands of brilliance, and then a lot of lacking data. So, yes. Do you, Mike, maybe for the people there?
You mentioned that companies and others do less training.
Yes.
Now, I mean, for what reason did we stop doing that?
Whew, that's a good question. In around 1992, a woman named Erica Groshin identified what we called a jobless recovery, where the U.S. employers moved from a layoff to a fire model. And when they did that, people were losing what we call firm-specific human capital, put them back into the market. Somewhere in that period of time, there was also a decline in the employer commitment to employer-provided training. The why is difficult to understand. I think maybe they were seeing to push the investment on work readiness onto the public sector. Could be, right? So it's a little bit more cost effective, is to make sure that the education system was delivering work readiness. But I don't know an actual, there's no actual moment that, or defining element in a big paper or commission that said, hey, let's stop investing. It just slowly happened over time. It's sort of the frog in the boiling water problem.
Would you say it was a cost-saving measure?
It could be. And so this is where I'd love to have some, like HR people or some big firms on their payroll management, like how do they look at the evaluation of time to productivity. And so you could see it as initially being a cost-saving measure, but it might be one of those false savings, and that would be the argument that I make. But again, since there's no defining element, there's an era where we used to make big investments, both in the public sector and from the employers coming out of World War II. And then by about 1989, 92, there was definitely a decline. The whys aren't as clear. Yes?
Yeah, on your, some of these data, when you look at policymakers, I'm saying legislators, and I lead a higher ed system, so I've never been elected to anything, but my friend, Representative Ballard, is part of that. Our data looks very similar to your national data in Kansas in terms of the percent of jobs that are going to require baccalaureate degrees, the percent of new jobs, all that alignment. The cost of college is going up. I'd almost say that some of that's reflective on how the cost has been financed traditionally. So legislators used to pay a lot more of that cost, state legislators, and now it's all on the consumer. But I've noticed that there is almost a unbridled enthusiasm to investing in jobs in the trades among policymakers that are elected, which I love the trades. But if you look at those companies, those location quotients are just 1.0. I mean, they are just, whether it's a hospital and nursing, whether it's an electrical, they're just not going to be a source of economic growth. And so how do you get, so I always say we have these data, but no one believes them. So what strategies do you use to get legislators and policymakers to actually believe the data that they're seeing?
That's a tough, very, very tough question. Let me think here. Traditionally, I wouldn't say necessarily in the current environment, but traditionally we work with practitioners on the ground and always try to take what we do at the center at a national level and bring it through the lens of replicating it using state level data, get that ownership so that the state workforce, and also bringing workforce people in. Oftentimes educators and workforce people don't sit at the same table. So getting the people in the state to acknowledge that the data trends that they're seeing are believable, because I don't want you to think you are the national average. We want to say, here's our approach to the problem. Why don't you run it and see what you think? Now, on the skilled trades issues, it's very difficult. I mean, President Biden, when early in the CHIPS Act, came out with all these $130,000 jobs that were going to be created. But if you look at the distribution in middle school, 3% of middle school jobs earn above $130,000. So again, back to the honesty, I think the same charge need be made on skilled trades. How many jobs in the skilled trade sectors, or even with some type of growth, are going to provide these high levels of earnings? So like I worked in Florida on credentials of value and, elevator mechanics, $100,000 a year. There's 5 of them. I'm sorry, we don't make workforce policy on these limited examples, and everybody who does statistics, myself included, fall back on storytelling. We need some data in there. So make believable, there's, it's tough because, if you're fighting against a prevailing wind, you can just be seen as, being defensive and arguing. So I haven't sorted out. The best angle that I get working with the states is one, thinking about the value of college. So if we look at the growth of the college premium, you can say 1 year to the next, the employer made a mistake. But if you look at 40 years, either you think the employers are idiots or they're making a good choice, average out all these periods of time. And those kind of arguments, I think, work, is that the data reveals what people believe is valuable. And so I find that to be helpful, which is your employer community are paying these and finding them to be productive. So, to strike a balance. But we as educators, in higher education, BA and above, we have to figure out how to stop treating training as the illegitimate child at the table, right? So there's this divide between education and training. For me, it's all human capital development. There is a distinction on this combination of general and specific skills that's important to keep on the table. But I'm sorry, it's education and training past high school. All right, it's college, community college, trade school, 4-year. It just happens that the demand is going to be more towards the BA side. So, anyways, please.
My question is really, I'll set the stage with what I believe is a commodification of higher education that's happening, which is sectoral competition increasingly supported by state legislatures in terms of we've got 2-year sector getting into 4-year degrees, 4-year sector increasingly in a constrained market, moving into the 2-year sector and moving into certificates. We've got this idea of that there's a full spectrum and that you can essentially fragment and stack the different skills into credentials, which you were talking about. But I'm curious as to whether you've done research on, is the yield there on a pound for pound basis in this commodification environment? So when we do dual enrollment and then the student stacks into a baccalaureate degree or an associate degree, are the outcomes as good for them in the labor market? Are certificates bearing out? Right now, I think that by and large, everyone's in love with certificates. There's not enough research on them. So I'm just curious as to the current state of your research in that regard.
Well, that's great. Great question. I'm working on a project right now on the ways that we conceptualize value and then how it relates to accountability. So I'm like knee deep in, especially in this issue of commodification. There's some great work out of the UK on this issue, and a couple other papers just looking at how the focus on the dollar has changed how we value education. So it's important. To your question about certificates, I've done an awful lot of work in the certificates and certifications area, and observing the data, suggests to me that people are using certifications in particular and certificates to some degree on top of a degree. And so that they are revealing that they're getting a benefit, and you can see it in some of the wage premiums about by these combinations. So I believe, without a lot of proof here, but this is just sort of my sense of at this point, is that we're having a breakdown of the old model. We used to have a model in the post-war period of go to school, go to work, maybe some training, right? And now we have this model that is kind of go to school, go to work, get some more, sometimes go back to school. And so it's a non-linear model where it used to be very linear. And so the movement towards certificates and certifications, if we think about them back to the skills model, I've got, like 43% of BAs have a certification, okay, which is really mind-boggling. And so they find themselves in the labor market needing some bona fide skill. They get these small bites and they add on. And so in my opinion, that's where things are going to be moving, because standalone certificates, short-term certificates don't bear value that often. There's less than 50% of short-term certificates. We're talking like 150 credit hours under Workforce Pell. I'm sorry, they don't bear reasonable earnings. But if we take those same items and add them on top of a BA, add them on top of another certificate, and not in the traditional stacking model, but just in a I need something new model, career advancement, they do they bring value. We don't have enough about this data on this sequencing issue. So working with your states, this would be a really valuable question to address, is stop like a standalone certificate, standalone certification. No. Let's think about how they add on to each other and magnify value. Yes, please.
So as you study the workforce, I'm curious how many years you think we are away from a standard 4-day work week?
Oh my gosh. I wish it was in my day. John Maynard Keynes predicted a 20-hour work week around 1920. We haven't seen that come up. So would we move to a 4-day work week? There's experiments that show that you get enhanced productivity from it. We're in this weird stage with all the stuff on pandemic and telework. It's not clear that the managerial class, shall I say, or groups, trust the ability not to manage the worker all the time. Where companies that have experimented working to a 4-day work week have seen enhanced productivity with, it's like a 35-hour work week, something like that, and they get more bang for the buck. And there's a lot of work of what's called efficiency wage theory that feeds into this, is that if you provide a set of conditions that are better than your competitors, you get more productivity enhancement from your workers. And so it's a nice trade-off between enabling people to have a little more time in their lives and enhancement in work. Will we get there? Oh dear Lord, it's a tough one. I don't see any logic in our work-based culture that is going to lean us towards not working, right? And so that's what we're talking about, is like 3 days off, 4 days working. That's like, you're not working. We have we celebrate 70-hour work weeks, and et cetera, et cetera. So we have to accept it. Would you let your staff work 4 days in 35? Okay.
Within a decade, to attract and keep quality people, we'll have to be on a 4-day work week.
Great. I think I would applaud you experimenting with it, because what we need is examples that there's a mutual benefit. And we were talking earlier about, there's a piece by a woman named Rebecca Blank looking at efficiency and equity trade-offs, and I don't mean equity in the political sense, but about raising up. And so this type of idea gives you the experimentation that in the short term you might think your investment is going to lose, but then you see enhanced productivity that's shared. Right? And if we think about the post-war model and the success in the United States, in part It was an agreement between the workers and the employers for shared productivity and benefits. So if we move into this new age, you're talking about a model that is having a shared space between work and life. And the worker benefits from it, and hopefully the employer would too. And if it does, great to see it. And I know that there's examples that show that it is playing out. Anyone else? Okay, tired you all out. You guys get to go back to those business items now, all right? Thank you.